Ladies and gentlemen, I just wanted to let you know we're waiting for the French panel to conclude, and then we'll get started immediately. So I'm going to run downstairs and check on the status of it for us.
Working?
Otherwise, it will be in your face.
I get it all the time. Ladies and gentlemen, if you can all take your seats, we would love to begin this evening. Thank you. First of all, good evening, and welcome to Women in Science and Technology. I'd like to start this evening by, first and foremost, calling the only man who cannot stage tonight, CTBTO's Executive Secretary, Lassina Zerbo, to give his opening remarks. Let's give him a very warm welcome.
So thank you, Yael. I was asking Yael, I said, what do you want me to say? Now, first of all, let me start by saying that for 8 o'clock, we have a great audience. And this is thanks to you women, because today, gender is an important issue. And this morning when Ms. Thompson said, when she was talking about gender balance, and then she talked about the time when women are taking care of children, I turned to Tammy and then I said, Tammy, I'm feeling a little bit, do you think we're right to put this panel at 8 o'clock? Because I don't want Ms. Thompson to say that the executive secretary of the CTBT is not taking care of women. But trust me, Ms. Thompson, I was telling you that I don't have a choice. If you know the number of women that I have at home, I'm a minority in my own house. So I have to be a gender champion. So as a gender champion, I think to us, having women in science is the best we can do for the series of CTBT Science and Technology conferences. And this is why we had 2 women who were or who are project executive of the SnT 219. And this is also why the SnT 19 is the best so far. It's the first time we have 2 women project executive of the conference. I did it myself. And if I have 2 women who have put the SnT to that level, I think we must give a big round of applause to all women in science. So, when I say this, sometimes I hesitate, especially when I have Tammy next to me. Tammy told me, what did she say? She said, I need a wife at home. So when she says she needs a wife, she means she needs somebody who can do her work so that she can carry on with the work at the CTBT. I guess that's what you mean. But anyway, Tammy and Nurjan, thank you so much for being role model for women in science. 2 of them are great scientists. And I want to thank the panel, thank Francesca as well for putting this together. And I think it will be a great event. And then you'll have refreshment after not only the Spanish-speaking panel, the French-speaking panel, and the cherry on top of the cake is women in science at the CTBT Science and Technology. Thank you so much for being here. God bless you. And God bless all women on earth. Thank you.
This is not a commercial for Starbucks, but it's 8 p.m. I'm a mother of 2. Their father is taking care of them right now, and I need coffee. Thank you for being here. Let's begin. The battle for gender equality has delivered remarkable achievements in every field of human endeavor. I think we can agree at that. From political representation to education and human rights, women have succeeded in gaining recognition and acceptance as leaders, thinkers, researchers, educators, and active citizens. But let's face it, there is a reason we've all gathered here today. The glass ceiling is far, far from being broken, and the road ahead is still long and hard, almost as hard as ratifying an agreement. So how do we go about it? I want to tell you a story. Several years ago, Sheryl Sandberg, well known for being COO and the #2 decision maker at the social platform giant that is Facebook, Number one is, of course, a man. His name is Mark. Wrote a book entitled Leaning In. It was meant to shed light on the struggle, or shall we say the battle, we women in almost every sector, be it academic, scientific, cultural, or business-oriented, still have to endure. It was a well-thought-out pep talk about how women can achieve it all. The book conditioned that if we women just change our approach, maybe change our mindset in the workplace, we may feel equal and act as if we're equal, then everything is achievable. I'll be honest with you, I did not like that book. I was not a fan of this book because the trouble is that that approach implies it's up to women alone to fix the problem of gender inequality. Companies in that narrative do not have to become more accommodating and less biased if all that's needed for more women to rise is for them to change their behavior. We all know that is not the case. Equality, or for that matter of fact, most things achieved, require community. They require a pluralism of gender. They require pluralism of agenda, and only then it can be achieved. The women that I'm about to call to this stage have not only leaned in, but owned and honed their skills, their brilliance, and their passion for science in a way that made them not just lean in, but me smack in the center of the room. I'd like to call these women to the stage right now. Ms. Saba Al-Mumin, please, if you would come to the stage. I'm calling to the stage Ms. Saba Al-Mumin. She is the research scientist in biotechnology at the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research. Dear Lord, Professor Sangamitra Bandayopade, Director of the Indian Statistical Institute, Ms. Joanne Bartley, Principal, Culture and Change of the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization in Kirawi, Ansto. Ms. Grace Liu, she's the Research Associate in East Asian Non-Proliferation Program at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies, and the millennial on the stage. And of course, last but not least, Ms. Elena Yakovleva, the President of Women in Nuclear Russia. Let me tell you a little bit about the presence, about the women that you are so lucky to be in the room with. Saba Al-Mumin, is a research scientist at the Kuwait Institute for Scientific Research. She holds a PhD in genetic engineering from the University of Surrey in the United Kingdom and an MSc in Library and Information Science from Claremont University of Pennsylvania. She's one of the pioneers in the field of genetic engineering and biotechnology in Kuwait and has introduced and worked on several advanced technologies such as development of diagnostic DNA probes, recombinant vaccines, embryo transfer and cloning in sheep, biotyping transgenic plants, and investigating algae as a potential feed. She's also the first female scientist of her field in Kuwait. Let's give her a warm applause. Professor Sangamitra Bandayopade, the director of the Indian Statistical Institute, is the director, as we said. Her research interests include computational biology and bioinformatics, soft and evolutionary computation, pattern recognition, and data mining. She's worked in various universities and institutions worldwide, including in the USA, Australia, Germany, China, France, Italy, Slovenia, and Mexico. She delivered and invited lectures in many countries, authored and co-authored more than 300 research articles in international journals, conferences, and book chapters, and published 6 authored and edited books from publishers like Springer, World Scientific, and Wiley. She's a fellow of the National Academy of Sciences, Allahabad in India, in the Indian National Academy of Engineering, INAE, the West Bengal Academy of Science and Technology, and the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and Indian National Science Academy. For each of the esteemed ladies on stage, I'm only reading half of their accomplishment, just so you know. Ms. Joanne Bartley, who traveled from very far to get here, is the Principal Culture and Change at the Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization, Kirawi, ANSTO. Jo Bartley leads a diverse team who shapes the culture of the organization by monitoring, predicting, and influencing workplace behaviors. She's an implementation leader for Australia's Male Champions of Change program and was a leader in ANSTO's effort to achieving an Athena Swan Bronze Award. She leads a team focused on business behavior, monitoring behavior, modeling and predicting behavior, and developing strategies, interventions to modify behavior. And behavior will eventually change the world. Grace Liu is a research associate at the East Asia Non-Proliferation Program at the James Martin Center for Non-Proliferation Studies. Pardon me. She produces geospatial intelligence, translates Korean and Chinese sources, and uses 3D modeling techniques to assess WMD and ballistic missile capabilities. She's also one of the prominent leaders at the CTBTO youth group, and she has delivered talks in support of CTBT across the globe. And she also previously served as an analyst in one of the most male-dominated organizations in every country, namely the Armed Forces. Ms. Elena Yakovleva is the president of Women in Nuclear Russia. She basically saw the need for an organization as such. She's also the director of and created it. She's the director of the popular industry news portal Nuclear 2.0 and a member of the public council of the Rosatom State Corporation. She's active in building a thriving community of women specialists as well as in outreach and communication for the nuclear industry. Her website is the most visited information source in Russia for nuclear industry news and is one of the largest in the world with over 100,000 publications. But before we begin our discussion with these fascinating ladies, and you will hear everything that they do and what they had to go through to get there, we have to start and to remind ourselves of some statistics, because still we're gathered here in 2019, and we women, no matter how successful we have been in realizing our full potential, we're still the minority in every sector. We have achieved a lot, so let's start though with the good news. And for this, I will need some graphics, as Dave knows. In scientific domains, women's march towards equality seemed unstoppable. Globally, in science higher education, women have achieved parity, 45 to 55%. That's in the education sector, at the bachelor's and master's levels, where they represent 53% of graduates in scientific disciplines. More women enter into STEM sectors than in any other knowledge domain. And indeed, throughout the world, women-led teams have delivered extraordinary results. It was, after all, a women-only team who sent India into space through the successful launch of a satellite into orbit around Mars. The very first anti-retroviral drug to treat AIDS came by the hand of a woman, who later went on to win the Nobel Prize in medicine. And women-run laboratories and research centers are increasingly emerging in domains such as nanotechnology, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence. Women working in these sectors, more than their male counterparts, are driven by a high call to contribute to improve societies and the quality of life of most of the most vulnerable. Yet, and here comes the yet, much work remains to be done towards full gender equality in STEM. In fact, despite major improvements, women remain a minority in this domain. At the PhD level, sadly, women's study science barely reaches 43%. The gap widens at the researcher level, where they now only account for 28.4% of researchers before becoming a gulf at the higher echelons of decision-making. Even worse than in science, technology sectors really put a bad light on where we stand. They continue to be male-dominated. In blockchain programming, for example, that's the newly sought-after tech field, less than 5% of programmers are women. Hedge fund companies, for instance, indispensable to provide the financial support for research, continue to be driven by men for men. According to several recent reports, progress in closing the gender gap in the $3.2 trillion industry of hedge funds has been slow. 19% of hedge fund professionals are women, up only slightly from the 18% of last year. In addition, and perhaps more disheartening, women are often subjected to mistreatment, harassment, and marginalization across many technology sectors. In 2015, a study entitled "The Elephant in the Valley," launched by a group of female CEOs in Silicon Valley, revealed how pervasive the discrimination against women was. 84% of the interviewees reported that they had been told they were too aggressive, too bossy in the office. 66% said that they had reported unwanted sexual advances in the workplace. A large majority of those advances came from a superior, and a third of the women in that study said that they'd been worried about their personal safety. Almost 40% said that they didn't report incidents because they feared retaliation. This, in turn, has discouraged women from pursuing careers in high-tech companies. The consequences of such exclusion are serious and will become even more dramatic in the future. Journalist Emily Chang has rightly pointed out that Silicon Valley is controlling what we see, what we read, how we shop, how we communicate, how we relate to each other. If it's controlled by only men, that's how we will think. The marginalization of women from these critical sectors will only widen and deepen the gender power gap in the future. We're gathered here today to start a discussion so that in science and technology, those statistics will change. And I'm very lucky to do so with the women on stage with me. I'm going to move and sit right next to them right now. We can change the slides back. How are you all doing? I'm actually going to start with Dr. Saba Al-Munim, and thank you all for being here. And we sat earlier today, and I asked you all the same question. And to me, what you said was remarkable. I'm going to share that with the audience, but bounce it off you again. You're a female scientist in Kuwait. We both come from the Middle East. I'm the first to say it's a very, very patriarchal region of the world. What did it take to get to where you got? I think it worked. It's on. It's on.
First, I'd like to thank the CTBT for organizing the first women's session ever. And it's quite an honor to be invited in this function and join distinguished ladies. I would like also to start commending the men who are attending here, and thank you for your interest and support. In Kuwait, actually, I was lucky to belong to that country because it does encourage so much the education of all on equal basis. The literacy is more than 99%. So we are quite ahead of a lot of developing countries. And it does provide opportunities for all. The women percentage is almost equal in education. 50% almost, women study science and technology. And that's quite an achievement. Now, where does that go wrong, or maybe not so wrong for quite few women, is that percentage drops after graduation. And it becomes less than 20% like almost all the countries. However, we do still beat the West and the US in that percentage, which is quite an achievement for developing countries. I was lucky, I was given a chance to study something that was not in the field that is offered at the university. We just have one university, and so not all fields are there at the time. And UNIDO, they asked for nomination to train 2 people in genetic engineering, and Kuwait was participating in establishing the International Center for Genetic Engineering, which is in Trieste now. So 2 people, 1 lady and 1 man, they went. The man didn't like it, so he came back. So they wanted a replacement. So there I was. That was, it's destiny that works. And it was a long training, more than a year training or 2 years, just training with no certificate of any sort. Just learn the technology and come back. But then you come back for almost nothing. Then you have to establish everything. And this is the responsibility which I took, is to establish laboratories in genetic engineering and to take the responsibility of being or establishing myself as a role model for people to be aware of this field, for people to start majoring. This is a new future field. So I put quite few research projects in different disciplines. Even me, I didn't try them. But I said that's my responsibility, that everybody should know that they can if they want to, and there is the opportunity. And that served quite a bit. A lot of girls, a lot of students came to me and said, I want to specialize like you in your field. And then the cloning came, and that was a big hit in the world. And so I was there as well. And you, when you interact with society, they get intrigued by everything that you do. I mean, people come to me and say, clone me. And I said, you're not my choice. So it started there, and with the cloning of animals and the new technologies, it was also first in the Middle East, in that particular area, right after the cloning of Dolly the sheep, there I come. So it's working really hard to achieve. It's proving yourself. It's proving that you're serious enough that you do what you do. And people can take you seriously. And then you are entering a major or a field that a lot of people are ignorant about. So they are intimidated. So they just keep away. And that was a trick that I played with.
I think one of the themes we will learn this evening is that it all begins with education. Equality will also begin with education. Sangamitra, professor, we also had a chance to discuss things before, and you said something wonderful to me, which was that you never doubted yourself or, what you wanted to do. But still, how did you get to where you wanted to be?
Well, what it took to get to wherever I am, it took whatever it takes anybody else. Essentially hard work, commitment, and also a sense that a price has to be paid. And accepting that I have to pay a price, maybe a little more than a man achieving the same as I have would have to pay. Accepting that fact and not complaining about it, because I have, in my life, understood that complaining gets one nowhere. So you have to fight the system, Luckily, I must say that I have been fortunate that I did not personally have to fight the system too much. Education, as you said, education was the key. And I come from a country where it is valued very highly, especially in the eastern part of the country where I come from. Education, it is considered, if a family has a little bit of money, that has to go into the education of the children. I did face, of course, the challenges later on in life, especially with the family. My son being born, and I had to take off, but I made sure that even when I was on maternity leave, I was working. So I think that is what it took. And in India, I come from India, there is no dearth of role models. We have had president, a woman prime minister. The state that I come from, West Bengal, has a woman chief minister. Our erstwhile defense minister and now the finance minister is a woman. So there are enough role models. The lunar mission, the second one in the country, the project director as well as the mission director, both are women. We have a woman who led the missile program. So women have been everywhere. So it's a country of diversity where, while we have women at the highest levels, we also have many, many families where women have no role to play except bringing up the children. So, but essentially what I have felt is that girls are equally capable, but if I take the situation of my own institute, for example, which is considered to be one of the premier research and teaching institutes of the country, when the entrance examination is very difficult, I have found that the girl students have somehow been left behind. They were not able to qualify to the extent that I would have liked them to. But when it's a long-drawn program, the girls do very well. So what I have personally believed is that our examination system needs a relook, needs a rethink, whether we are testing what is supposed to be tested. The innovation, the creativity, are we testing that? Had we really tested that, I think it would have given the women and the men an equal playing field. And then, of course, women in science panels would not be needed.
I think the hope for all of us, and we discussed this earlier, that gender equality will be achieved when there will not be a need for International Women's Day. Joe Bartley, Principal Culture and Change, Australian Nuclear Science and Technology Organization. You deal with actually changing behavior within the workspace in many ways. How'd you get there, and what needs to be changed?
I think it's really interesting. What brought me here today is healthy competition between powerful men. I'm part of the Male Champions of Change program in Australia, and in our particular group, it's the STEM group, and it's a group of STEM organisations. Competition is probably too strong of a word. Let's call it a healthy rivalry seeded in a strong business case for diversity and inclusion. And that's really what I talk about within the context of my own organisation, and what we share as a STEM industry group is talking about the why of diversity and inclusion. And for me, that comes down to three things. First of all, it's the right thing to do. There is an ethical and moral imperative for us to reflect the communities that we serve. And if you work in science, then you are serving communities. There's also a safety element. Creating mental health is one of the biggest challenges that is going to face workplaces in the future. It's not about physical threats, it's about mental health and bringing a whole self to work. Inclusive workplaces are a protective factor when it comes to mental health. It's a lead time intervention that you can make today to create a safer workspace for the employees, who most organisations say are their number one asset. And then there's also the element of that it's the smart thing to do. The empirical evidence is overwhelming that on the things that matter to science and technology organisations, innovation, risk identification, risk control, financial decision making, Diverse teams make better decisions in a more efficient way. And so that's really what I work to do, is understanding if that's the business case for diversity and inclusion, how are you going to make changes in your workplace today? And while I'm pleased to see the gender balance in the room, I'm not sure that that's what the rest of the conference looks like in terms of the sea of faces. I think it's time for us to stop pretending like diversity and inclusion is a women's issue. If you lead a team or are part of a team, this is a performance issue. This is how we're going to get return on investment from our people. With the work that the professor's doing in artificial intelligence, our humanness is going to be the thing that we bring to the workplace of the future, and diversity and inclusion is how we maximize the performance of those human factors.
Amen. Alena, you are the head of the president of Women in Nuclear Russia. Tell us what it is and why there was a need for this organization.
Thank you for the question. First of all, I would like to express my sincerely feeling that it's a very big honor for me to be speaker at this greatest panel discussion, Women in Nuclear and Technology. A few words about what Women in Nuclear Global. It's a big public volunteer organization, units about 35,000 women specialists, scientists, advocates, or some public leaders from over 100 countries all over the world. And these organizations helps each other communicate, be active professionally and self-development, also be vocal on their opinion, and engage in many different social and professional events, starting from charity, sports program, or educational seminars and discussion on the most important nuclear sensitive issues in nuclear. It has been joy and absolutely fascinating for me to work with my colleagues and to meet with them regularly and on a different project, in professionally and socially, and meet regularly and see how they grow in confidence as leaders. Unlike the Western world, the topic gender balance and equality has ever risen in Russia. And Russia is still a traditional and patriarchal country with strong marriage and childbearing. Yes, but now I would like to present you some industry statistic about women in nuclear. As you know, Russia, one of the leaders in nuclear energy development, with over 36 unit reactors planned to be exported abroad. And in my country, women constitute about 34% of total workforce, 18% among decision-making personnel, and 22% among top-level executives. But at the total percentage of women in nuclear and nuclear industry are unfortunately not rise and has a little drop by 5% in the last 5 years. Overall, in Russia, women receive 30% less salary than men. And as you can see, Russia has much work to do on improving gender balance and equality. And our government has acknowledged this problem and now be active to organize international conference forum that start to discuss this for women, start to discuss these issues and others. And what I would like to focus. First of all, I would like to focus that huge potential lies in women coordinating to each other, motivating, learning, and professionally growth, professionally grows and also individually grows together. It's very important together. In my organization, Women in Nuclear Russia, or Win Russia, we shortly say Win Russia, we are creating we are focused on creating a lovely community of leaders and friends who are very happy and be proud of part of scientific progress and chosen area of work. And now I would like to bring your attention to the three important aspects that will be benefit for success, beneficial to success women in nuclear. It's my opinion, because from my point of view. First, women should not directly compete with the men. Not be like men. Remain feminine and win their heart with inspiration through compassion, intellect, kindness, caring, and professionalism and responsible attitude, I think, is very important. And also, we need, in nuclear, we need integrate together women and men, integration, women and men intellect, and also for successful cooperation, of course. It's very important. And second, and we can become very great partners and friends in it. And then second, I think women should not be afraid to ask help and speak about their problem and some ideas and dreams, and very important because I think this is, and do it in very comfortable and caring way. And the third, and that's the biggest opportunity for women, lies, of course, again, to communication professionally and work with the public, where we can truly shine like a beautiful, brilliant, as we all like, because women are great and the great presenters. We can motivate society for the better and improve through our compassion, through our intellect, and change for the better. And it's also very important, I think, for developing communication, of course, in nuclear. Pro-women media channel, it's very important, where we can discuss, educate, and learn very important issue between each other and what we really do in many ways in Win Nuclear. And the last, finally, it's very important. In the end, I would like to add that men who attend our events remain very impressed with the amount of passion and dedication that our women have, and say, they feel the world now in the good, caring, and loving hands. Thank you.
Before I go to Grace Lou, I think one of the defining themes this evening will be that one of the things I think the world needs to learn is that it's not a competition, and we don't really want to override men. We just want equality. And that's one of the main things that we're all striving for in every sector, and definitely in science and technology. Grace Lou, the research associate at the East Asian Non-Proliferation Program, is a millennial. I'm also a teacher and a lecturer, and my students are usually your age. And as I said to you earlier today, what I very much like about millennials, as opposed to when I entered the workforce, when I I'm a journalist and I was a producer. It was back in the early 90s, late 80s. I felt very lucky to be accepted. I remember to the first job I got, and that was ABC News, and I remember entering the room, and I was one of 3 women and 25 men. And as opposed to millennials nowadays, which what I think the future lies on your shoulders, is that you don't feel lucky. You just ask, what is it in it for me? What do I get out of it? And that's already progress. But tell me what it means to be a woman, and you've achieved a lot in your early age. But how did you get to where you got, and what sacrifices did you have to make along the way?
Well, thank you so much. So that's exactly what I wanted to hit on, was not only being a millennial, but also growing up in the United States. My challenges and issues and obstacles that I faced as a woman were very different, both in the challenges and the opportunities that I had. So growing up, when I was younger, I didn't really grow up with the experience where someone flat out told me, no, you can't do something because you're a girl. Usually it was in snide little microaggressions, like, oh, you kick like a girl, or you throw like a girl, or, something that alludes to, yeah, you can do it, you just can't do it as well as the boys. So, I want to start with a story which highlights really when the gravity of what that meant for my career or my success as a woman really hit me. And that was actually when I was at basic training. So like Yael mentioned, I served in the US Army for a little while. And basic training is one of the first experiences that every soldier has to go through. It's hard, it sucks. But one of the first exercises that we did, so after the first initial period where you in process and you learn the basic, kind of the basics of the military, you take a series of tests. And then pretty early on, you're ranked, depending on how quickly you're able to learn, how well you're able to perform. So after the first, section of basic training, I was already scoring at the top of my class. So naturally, in the next part of the section, they chose the top 2 of us to become the first leaders in our operational exercise. So it happened to be me and a man who, if you can just imagine the most quintessential American soldier, tall, white, buzz-cut guy, muscular. He just looks like the picture of what you would imagine a soldier to be. So both of us are selected, but I did score higher than him, so I was really the one in charge. So we go into this briefing room to get the information on our first exercise. So our job is to get this information and basically plan this mission and lead our team through it. So we go into the room, everything's very quick-paced, so we barely get to we didn't even introduce ourselves, and immediately our drill sergeants start briefing us right away. And so these were new drill sergeants who didn't know us. They were in the next chapter of phase of the course. So they start briefing, and I immediately notice they are not making eye contact with me. They're not really talking to me. He and I are standing right next to each other at attention, receiving this brief. And then at the very end, they say, okay, do you have any questions? And they say it directly to him. And it's still funny today, but he goes, no, but she's in charge. So that to me, it was frustrating standing there throughout the whole brief, not really getting talked to at all, and them just making the assumption because he looked like, he was the soldier, he should be in charge, that they just automatically assumed that that was the position that he was in. So again, I have to thank, the generations of women before me. As a millennial, there's so much, not only in the United States, but everywhere in the world that women before me who have fought the good fight, brought us up, this hard uphill battle, and whose work gave me the opportunities to, even go to school, vote, join the military. But we still face so many challenges today. And some of that, I also want to emphasize the importance of intersectionality. So not only the challenges that women face, but women of color, young women, women from different socioeconomic backgrounds, living in different countries. This places us all at different points in the uphill battle, but regardless of where we are, I really believe there's progress to be made everywhere. So I want to say thank you for having me on this panel. It's been wonderful sharing this stage with you all.
We're just getting started. There's a cross-section on the stage of ages and generations. But I want to, because as you mentioned, you face something that I think we all faced, where we enter a room and we are in charge, but nobody can really understand how a woman is the one leading it. But you spoke about sacrifices, Professor. And I'm wondering, and any one of you can pick it up, throughout your career, for those of us here that had passed some years, that have children, but not just that, do you feel there are sacrifices that you made that a man would not make to get to where you are?
Yes, some sacrifices had to be made, especially with respect to bringing up the child. That is, I wouldn't say that's a regret, because that is how I am. So, in India, we have many goddesses. One of them has 10 hands, and a woman is expected to have 10 hands. So doing everything at the same time.
We do.
We don't. That is what we have to accept, and that is what the society also has to accept, that a woman does not have 10 hands. She has 2 hands, she has 24 hours a day, and that's it. Therefore, if you give... So that means if you give more time to your work, your family, you cannot give that much of time to your family. And that is something that the society and the woman herself will have to accept. On my part, I accepted that, that I love my work more. It's not that I don't love my family. Of course I do. But then I love my work so much that at times I give work priority than my family.
Is it priority, or is it the society that we live in that expects a woman?
Yes, of course. The society expects a woman to be in the family, to be taking care of the family. And in the society that I come from, the society also expects the man to take care of the family, of the parents in particular, in their old age, and therefore the man is expected to earn. A woman earns, well, so be it, fine, but a man is expected to earn. That also needs to change. A woman, the same should be expected of a woman. In fact, I've found in very young children, girls and boys, a boy grows up by realizing that he has to earn. A girl grows up by understanding that she would have to take care of the family. She may want to earn just to supplement the income of the family. So this is a major change which has to come in the mindset of the society, of the girl herself, that she is not earning to supplement the income. I mean, what else is this person supposed to do? A person is supposed to work and earning. So that should be a part of life. So, yeah, I mean, a lot of change is needed from the society, from the girl, from the men, from the women, all, as you said. It is not about a competition, but it is about holding the sky up together.
Amen to that. And when it comes to the culture and a woman's role, and Saba, also to you I ask, Professor, you're a director, but I also find in every sector that I've worked that not just the ratio of men and women, but the administration, the management was mostly male, I guess teachers. To this day, wherever I worked, still 80 to 20. 80 to 20, 80 to 20. Are more women coming into science and being administrators? Would you like to see more of them do that? Why don't we get to that point where we are the ones, to put it bluntly, calling the shots?
Okay, so in general, developing countries, MENA region, the system, a lot of the systems there, when you get that chair, you almost stay forever. So, there is no terms defined. You're not staying there like 3 years and going off. There is no assessment. Now, this is just a general, not total. Universities, they have the system. You serve a term as a manager, and you go and do your science. A lot of jobs, you take it, you keep it till you retire. Now, that doesn't give a chance for almost everybody else, let alone a woman. Now, getting into administration and management, you know that you are the minority. And you know that you have to work not twice, 3 times as hard. You really have to be there and shine, and with your own powers. There's no one behind you. And this is what I say is like, behind every great man is a woman. No, she's still behind. But behind every successful woman is herself. So, the system, not only in developing countries, but almost all over, men are master of networking. They're very organized. They're very professional in their networks. And they have shared benefits. Women, they don't have that. The gathering of women are different. The tradition of men going to pubs, going to what we have in our culture, the D1s, you just meet almost every day, every week is a ritual for men.
The boys' club.
Yes. And this is where all the business and dealing and wheeling take place. And the women have to know how to do that, have to learn that skill. We do have some women that went up, but you probably have to wait until the age of 60 when you get that chance. Like we have now a director of our institute. Now finally she got there after more than 45 years serving as a researcher in that thing. So what we're looking for, our role model, it took her that long. And a lot of women do take that long. We have a woman who shined when Kuwait was in war, and we had the fires of Kuwait, of the oil wells, and she was heading a team. She was an engineer, and she has to design how to extinguish all these fires. She got recognized for her work. Now, we don't want to set a country on fire to get known. So it's either like 40 years, fires, or you belong to a certain class or a certain sect or a certain thing. So yeah, it's still there.
It's still there, and I think it's evident also, sadly, by the amount of women also leading countries around the world. Not enough and not equal enough. I want to ask you, Joanne, because you basically designed this, what sounds to me like this little heaven, but an anomaly, of women administrators, managers with you, right?
Yes and no. I think part of the importance of industry groups, especially in the science and technology space, is that there is no one thing that works. Right? If there was one thing that works, I wouldn't be here speaking as Jo Bartley, Principal of Culture at ANSTO. I'd be Jo Bartley Incorporated, and I'd be handing out my business cards to sell you what that solution is. But when we talk about diversity and inclusion, we're science and technology organisations, right? It's about experimenting about what works and reporting back. That's the value of the community that you create. And so one of the things that we've tried in my organisation, we've had a very passionate CEO for almost 10 years now. I don't know if any of you have ever heard Adi Patterson talk about diversity and inclusion. It is not an add-on for him. It permeates through everything that he talks about, and for those 3 reasons that I talked about earlier. But a passionate CEO and a passionate executive team in the first 8 years got us very little in terms of moving the numbers. That after him being there for 8 years and the executive team all being on board and plenty of rhetoric about the value of diversity and inclusion, we still had an executive team with only 15% women, and we still had a top leadership team of 32% women. And 18 months ago, the executive team decided to set a KPI, a representation KPI, 40-40-20, that if we understand that the top performing teams are diverse, then our teams that make our important business decisions better be diverse. We better have the right people in the room to leverage a return on investment of that. And in the 18 months since setting the KPI, our board has 50-50 representation, our executive team has 50-50 representation, and our top tier of senior management has 42% representation. You signal what's important by what you measure. Measure it like it matters, because it does.
And this is to all of you, feel free to pick it up, because I think, to pick this up, I think data is the one thing that will really help move things forward. Because I work in blockchain now, okay? I report on finance. I've been shot at many, many years covering wars in the Middle East, and then by the time I reached the age of 39, I realized nothing's gonna change, might as well move to cover finances. But that said, in blockchain, for example, this is emerging new field, 5%, less than 5% of programmers are women. Ridiculous, ridiculous, ridiculous. And I'm wondering, because we all hoped in every sector that there was this golden moment about 2 years ago with a hashtag called #MeToo, which to me did not just signal sexual harassment. It also signaled being diminished if you're a woman in a certain position, being in a room where, apropos, you're in charge, but you're a woman, so nobody would think you're in charge. And all of that. But there are many that will say that the Me Too movement, first of all, I'm wondering how it resonated in your countries, and if it resonated. And do we think that it helps also in the science and technology field? And not just for harassment, but just being that person who's supposed to feel lucky, no matter how far we've come, but supposed to feel lucky for reaching where they reached. Has it been good or bad for us? Feel free.
Yep. So, regarding your first point about data, yes, of course, data is absolutely essential in order to understand a situation, and also economics of the situation. If we say bring more women into science, why do we need that? Is science poorer because women are not there? So this study has to be there, and as Joanna, you mentioned, that organizations, industries, industries which have a lot of women in their workforce make more profit. That has been studied and established. Sure. So we have to establish that it's not social work that someone is doing by allowing more women to come into the workforce. It is not social work at all. It's not for the benefit of the women. It is for the benefit of all. It is for the benefit of society that we have to have more women in the workforce because they bring in a different perspective to the same problem, a different way of looking, a different way of finding the solutions. And I usually say that when nature distributed talent, it did not look whether it was a man or a woman. So unless the women are in the workforce, data shows that women should be there. It makes economic sense to have women in the workforce. We might be losing out on, I don't know, many important discoveries, inventions, where from the next healthcare solution will come from a man or a woman, we don't know. So we have to give all opportunities to all. And about the Me Too movement, I think it is an important movement, enabling the women to come out and say things which earlier women were unable to articulate. It has its positives, a lot of them, a few negatives. Positives, of course, because first of all, things are out in the open, and in order to solve a problem, you have to first accept that there is a problem. So with more and more women coming out, we know that the problem is widespread. Many women we knew already, but now entire world knows how widespread the problem can be. It is also sometimes, said more than, it gets more than its due importance, but then it acts as a major deterrent for others. In science, where there are many women researchers, research scholars, they face a lot of problems in terms of supervisors. Many women, many girl students want women supervisors, maybe because they've faced negatives in life, but so that is another area where women and men have to know how to behave, because a supervisor and a student relationship is entirely based on trust and a lot of mutual interaction. So yes, the Me Too movement is good. At the same time, there have been instances where it has been to some extent misused. That is something we have to guard against as well. Otherwise, it will lose its steam. So that is all that I had to say on this.
Yeah, I think the Me Too movement really brings us to the conversation of inclusion and how it's different from diversity. Diversity is the numbers game, right? You can put a whole bunch of people, diverse people, in a room. You're not going to get a return on that investment unless you're having the really difficult, gritty conversations around inclusion. The Male Champions of Change in Australia just did a survey of about 3,000 STEM qualified professionals. And what that showed is that 2/3 of women who responded to that survey had personally experienced their voice being devalued in a work context. And yet only 1/3 of men said that they had ever observed it even once. What we're talking about, what the data shows us, is that these are invisible and normalized behaviors. When I'm talking about devaluing of women's voices and men are saying, oh, but that wouldn't happen in my meeting, I've never seen it. Exactly. The data tells me that you can't see it. It doesn't mean that it doesn't exist, and it doesn't mean that it's not a conversation that we need to have to get a return on investment from diversity.
Entirely.
Yeah. Maybe I would like to add to our conversation that, of course, artificial technology like artificial intelligence, quantum science, bring a lot of many changes and developments to our society. But in my opinion, I think women should remain with strong hold culture advantages as equal opportunities, gender balance, openness, democracy, and family-oriented, of course, government policies, and humanistic education. And keeping such values, teaching such value is equally important to the success to the new generation as technologies advances.
I entirely, and it made me think of all of you, because when we talk about education, and needless to say, we're sitting here and there are some places in the world where girls are still not allowed to go to school, which is ridiculous. But education also begins at home. And that also to all of you, did you find that your parents, I do think that's key in many ways, because to be a woman, a successful woman these days, in the Western world, you need to be white, and you need to come from a certain background. That's the West, and it enables you to achieve the same things as men. But in the developing world, I think it's much harder. And it takes, as we say, it takes an educator at home. Do you find that at home you had the backing growing up that said you can do everything? You can do anything you put your mind to. Was that the case? Who wants to take it?
Well, my parents at the level just read and write. So they didn't have to be that much educated to be that much cultured, that has this kind of thinking that I want you to be a doctor, I want you to be an engineer, because this is their dreams. And in fact, when they say words like that, the child does take these words in. And growing up, yes, I want to make their dream come true. And this is where the push comes, no matter what. I think the family do have a big role, except like some families, it's a culture thing that, okay, you can study science and technology. What you going to do with it? Now, I don't blame so much the person, but when you are in a developing country and you have this plan to develop your country, you must have a clear plan what you want to do and when and timely. Now, what we have, okay, you go ahead and study whatever you want. Come back as a nuclear engineer, come back as where is my job? I come back, what am I going to do? You want me to be a nuclear engineer. Where? Which organization? Do you have a reactor that I can work with? And it's not only that, it's in a lot of disciplines. Like I came with genetic engineering. I had to establish it, so you really have to have that strength to start from zero. But the governments have to bear that responsibility is when you have policies and planning and you send all these people getting degrees in fantastic fields, you better be ready when they come back. They shouldn't stay at home and it's going to be their choice. And so that's what happened. Okay, after you graduate, okay, I educated 50% of you, but now I only have 10% in the workplace. That's because I'm not offering.
So yes, as you said, the family plays a major role. But beyond the family, for example, in my case, education was the key, of course. But beyond that, I was encouraged to do many, many things. So I do remember one incident where I was very young then. I was trying to climb a tree, and but I was a little scared, and my mother said, "Go ahead, climb it. If you fall, I'm there." That was a big confidence booster. So the family, and then, of course, the other thing that I think we women get used to is being taken care of. You understand? Your safety, your security, and all these things. So all the time, either the parents or in a married life, the husband tries to take care of the woman. Luckily, in my case, my husband never tried to take care of me. Therefore, I was left to fend for myself. And that actually made me a better person in terms of strength of mind. So I think this expectation that a girl will be taken care of all the time, that expectation we should also reduce of others and become much more self-reliant. Nobody should be opening, for example, the car doors for me. I can open it myself. I mean, I think capable enough. Also, the other. I don't. Well, that is how you become less and less dependent on anybody else. The other thing that is very commonly seen, especially in my country, I've observed it and I've tried to change it in my institution, is suppose a conference or some such event is happening, and then in the inauguration, the gifts have to be given to the dignitaries on the dais. It's always the girls who bring it in, which I try to change. So at least 50% boys, 50% girls should bring in the trays. So these are the things which are unsaid, but things where we sort of, we have a bias somewhere. We don't realize that this is also a bias, that all the girls are supposed to bring in all the presents. So these are biases we have.
There are biases that and we're going to open this to audience questions very shortly, biases that no matter where we live, we are part of. I have a son and a daughter, and one of the main original fights I had with my husband was, you're going to take the dishes off the table so your son sees you doing it. Yeah. And we're all going to share that responsibility because the household is a community. And he learned, so it's possible. Let's open this for questions. If any of you, first of all, this is an amazing opportunity when you have these powerful women on stage, and I would love for you, there we go. If there can be a microphone to be given, and we could see a little bit. There we go, one there.
Thank you very much. Thank you, distinguished panelists. I was lucky to have run into you as I was coming, and I was able to take a picture with you, and I'll cherish that. You've all achieved so much in your various fields as scientists. I will start by introducing myself. My name is Ambassador Vivian Okeke. I'm the Nigerian ambassador to Austria. And also, I will say that in my field, I'm also a first from my community to be made a woman ambassador. So, so most of the stories you've shared, I kind of have the same experience. Saba, you talked about being yourself, not losing focus and working hard. I do think that that's part of the success for any woman. And for my case, a woman from a developing country, I'm from Africa, where, like you talked about, education is key. You still find that almost 20% of the population of the children are out of school. And then in that 20%, 80% are women because of cultural stereotypes that it's better to educate a boy than a woman. For my case, that I'm achieved what I did today was because my mother insisted on educating me beyond secondary school. And with that, I was able to qualify to be a graduate. Now I have children, I have daughters. I have a daughter who is an engineer. She read engineering, but she worked 1 year as an engineer and have chosen to go into media communication. So my question, I know it takes so hard to sustain. How do you sustain women in science and technology? In the morning panel, they said graduation level is you can get 50% graduation, but down the career line, you now have a drop, and I'm a living example of that. And I want us to look at how do you sustain.
I think it's a great question because first of all, wonderful to meet you, and it's amazing to hear these stories. Just because your daughter is in media and I'm in medias, so condolences. That's a joke. But I think, and one of the main reasons we're all here on stage, we talk about education. Of course, it is education, but as you've heard from all the women here, once we leave and we have our degrees, the world also needs to change and not enable us, but accept that we are part of that workplace. And I think it needs to be an international effort, to be honest with you. It can't just be country-based. Because, and I know that's naive and that's hopeful, but I think if the international community would put women's education around the world and gender equality as a key point, and yes, that's naive, but it is such an important mission because we're also 50% of the human beings on this earth, then we stand a chance. And let's hope that becomes an initiative. Let's hope that becomes one of those. Would be wonderful to have more questions if you guys have. Yes.
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. Grace, I had a question for you specifically. I'm kind of looking at the stage and there's just like this really great and valuable kind of generational gap. And it just kind of seems, I was wondering, Grace, if there's anything, you kind of wanted to add to the conversation that your fellow panelists were saying. Just kind of would love to hear from you and your perspective, because I think it feeds into a lot of the youth group members that are here. What are some of the things, you're seeing right now that you might want to bring up to the attention of the women who are older than us, who can also help us and be allies, as well as the older men? What would be really helpful to have as a mentor right now as we are kind of coming up in our field?
Thanks so much, Shervin. Yeah, I think one of the things I would like to add to this conversation is, and to the ambassador's question, is millennial women, younger women, we expect different things from our degrees, our careers, our workplaces. Like Yael mentioned before, we're not just grateful to have a spot anymore. We want to not only get something out of it, but create more and impact our workplace, our direct teammates, our bosses through what we do. And I think part of retaining, especially young women in these traditionally male-dominated fields, is being able to create workplaces that facilitate, the type of impact that we want to make. So empowering those young voices, which again, the CTBTO youth group has done an amazing job doing, but having, or looking at, corporate structures, your organizational values, the things that you measure, are those things that really value the input from women, from young people, that value progress, where the younger generation thinks the world is going to go eventually, and to feed that back into science and technology on a more global scale. Science and technology is really what, is one of the most powerful drivers in changing how the world functions. And if an entire half of the population is not involved in that development, that research, that production process, then we're building a world that's inherently more disadvantageous to women. So I think that's something that we really look for, is how do we make that impact in not only for ourselves, but for those of us who have felt disadvantaged in different ways because of, again, gender, ethnicity, where we grew up. Thanks, Shervin. Yeah. You're going to take right and then go there. That's okay.
So we heard from great women, and it is very important, but it shouldn't be women only asking questions. Men should come and also ask questions. It should not be men. I'm standing here because my mother married. She had 9 children, and I was one of them. Growing up as a refugee kid in Burundi, my mother probably realizing the 9 children, one of them could make it in terms of, in very early on, she really supported me. With the few resources we had, she would buy books for me, math books, whatever. So I'm sitting here just because really my mother did it. So this is why in my life when I became Minister of Education. I made sure that I tried to understand the issue of education and women, even just at the very early age. During the time I was Minister of Education, it was at the time of the Millennium Development Goals. Between 2000 and 2015, I was Minister of Education 2006, but really in charge of science from 2001 to 2009. So this means in terms of science, I was in charge for 8 years in Rwanda. We realized that actually in lower primary, we had more girls than boys, actually. As they go up in higher and higher level, we have less and less girls. And then you realize these are things that are cultural. This is social science is also important to understand why. But don't forget that at home, the mother is in charge. But culturally, she believes that the boy she has to support the boy. This means when the girl and the boy comes home, the mom will tell the boy, go and study, and the girl come and help me. And even just to fetch water, the girl will be the one sent to fetch water. Actually, the boy is much stronger than the girl. So we did a study actually with the FAWE, the Forum of African Women Educationalists and UNESCO, and come up with actually, we went into homes and tried to understand what happened. And they come up with all these challenges, and we try to implement them to make sure that as they go up, there is an equal opportunity to both. So these are something that I think is very important. So in that sense, the issue of equality, this is a human rights issue. See, in the developing world, actually, most of the taxes, if you look at it, come from the contribution for women. Because women are farmers, they do all this type of work in the farming, for example. You will see that actually women actually bring more money for the tax payers, but they don't get a fair share. And it's not about competition between men and the women, it's about getting a fair share in the society. I'll end up saying that I'm so happy to see that two of the women who are there, one of them is a member of TWAS, and we were inducted at the same time, Al-Momem Sabah, and the other one, the second one, is a prize winner in engineering. To get a prize of TWAS prize in engineering, this means you need to beat everybody in the developing world. This means you need to beat the Chinese, the Brazilians, and the other ones. You need to beat all of them. So when she sits there, I think she's the first woman to get a prize in engineering, by the way, in TWAS. So we are very happy. And of course, Professor Thompson, who was also elected very recently at TWAS, is also an honor for us to see that. And these women carry that, what we are seeing now. I think we'll be seeing some changes in the years to come.
Amen. There was a question in the back, I think, before. Okay. I'm sorry, I can barely see whomever's. Yeah, I think that a hand raised. Microphone. Can you give her a microphone?
What is she doing? Okay, so I'm going to ask my question here. My name is Ludmila Bogdan, and I have a comment.
Yes.
So, like everyone else, I came here because I thought that I will have women talking about science and technology. And what did we get? Women were asked how gender played a role and how they got here. Will a man be asked this question? The other panels, we had men and women talking about real business. And when we have all women panels, what they are asked about their sacrifices and about their gender. So my question is this really empowering? We have all these experts, and we all expected that they are going to talk about their jobs, but we all narrow it down to their gender. So, thank you.
No, thank you, and I think this is a very, very important question. It truly is. First of all, the fact is that women are still a minority in the science sector. This panel is also represented as such, women in science and technology. And the fact of the matter is that to be a woman scientist, and first of all, you can ask also a scientific question if you want to ask the women a scientific question. If you have a specific question on their work, feel free. That's one. Secondly, sadly, as the research and the data that opened this evening and presented the agenda stated, the numbers are staggering. The data, numbers of the amount of women in science as opposed to men, as it is in every sector, is the reason we gathered here today. Because it is an issue, because it's still happening, and because it needs to be discussed. Now, maybe the way to solve it is just to put women on stage and discuss science. But then I wouldn't just put women on stage, I would put all the scientists together. The fact of the matter is that in 2019, we still need panels that show an audience and the community that we are a minority and that needs to be discussed, just as Joe said. That unless we just turn this into a conversation, it's not going to change.
Yes, you're totally right. If I might interrupt, that's correct. But when people come here, I want to hear the experts. We are the experts. The gender is something which can be discussed later, but it's not the primary thing. We know that it's hard. We know that women got it.
No, I don't think we don't. I don't think everybody knows that.
But these are the ways to change how the people look at them. Because after that, I walked out like, oh my God, this woman is such a great biologist. That woman is such a great leading person of this organization, and that's how we, all of us, are gonna change our minds. I would go and say, this is great. Like, I never expected to see so many women from all those countries, all around the world, and they are the experts. But what are we gonna get after this panel? I'm gonna walk out like everyone else and say,
I think you're speaking
okay,
your opinion right now. Let's ask the rest of the people. Is
could,
everybody incredibly
definitely.
disappointed?
We could.
Was that the point of this?
Thank you so much. If I can say, I mean, I'm very happy to hear your position as a young person, but I have to support the fact that women are at a disadvantage sometimes. And so this is why, whereas we understand your position as a young woman, and I think that your age, I would have thought the same thing. I understand, it is, but you have to understand from the point of other people as well. We are not here to just put down your point of view, but I think that it will be at another panel level. If not, we'll never, put up the fact and the life of those women. And I have to tell you, I have been in this business very long. I've got my young daughter, which is with me now, which is a scientist as well, and she appreciates although what the experts and those women are saying. I brought myself up to young women. Like I say, she's 32 today, scientist. Amen. And we appreciate those powerful women today. And so I'll be happy to talk to you after that.
And social behavior is also a science. Social behavior, by that we mean, as Saba said, is how society looks at us. And if we don't have these discussions, if we don't raise these points, they will not be discussed. And that's where it all begins.
Yeah, look, I think if we think that change is going to happen by osmosis, then we're kidding ourselves. There have been panels on gender equity in science since before I was born, right? We're not going to see change unless we're having real conversations, unless we're sharing, unless we're understanding from the bright, shining examples who sit up with me on the panel, how their experience was different, and then applying that in our organizations to make purposeful change. And that's because not just because it's the right thing to do, not just because it's the safe thing to do, because it's the smart business thing to do, for us to be addressing these difficult conversations, learning from the incredibly accomplished women on what made a difference, how did they rise to the top when there's so many systematic barriers facing other women in sciences. The numbers show us that. So this is part of the experiment. It's part of understanding the data, understanding the experiences of women who have been successful, to learn what we need to change to get more successful women up here.
Amen. And I think that was the purpose of this whole conversation, is if we don't talk about it, then it doesn't exist. The problem that we are still a minority. And that's why we have to talk about it. And it's time, so let me just say this. To conclude this for all of you, one of the reasons I agreed to moderate this panel is because I have a 7-year-old daughter. And that 7-year-old daughter lives in the country that right now, finally, a book came out saying, famous scientists, female scientists. That's where education begins. But it also, of course, begins in discussions. And one of my main hopes for all of us is, because it does need an international effort, and it does need education. It's not just us sitting and waxing poetics on what we achieved in our scientific research, rather saying what it took us to get here. And what I hope is that when Leah, and that's my daughter, that when she's 20, then there will not be a need for us to sit and say what it took for us to get here. And that, I think, is the hope of all of this. I want to thank the amazing, amazing women on stage. I want to thank you all for coming. And I think there are drinks somewhere in the building as well. Okay? Thank you, thank you, thank you all. Shit. Lost your phone from it.
Can I ever see? Yeah, but yeah, at least of the final week necessary to I want to final hours to say.